Hello, people. I hope you are all doing well. We are going to get started. This is lesson 8, Racing the American Dream Part 2. And I was going to just do one part originally. Then I decided to do 2 parts. And we're actually going to do 3 parts. So today is going to be very similar to our first lesson on Racing the American Dream. Except it's going to be a little bit more in depth. That was kind of a teen up for you guys, and now we're going to kind of hit it really hard with this lecture today, okay? And then part 3, we're going to look at some works and speeches by people like MLK, some Mexican-American immigrants, stuff like that. But today, it's going to be very similar to the other day, except instead of a writing prompt, we're going to do a journal entry, third journal entry. I put another example for myself. I wrote one as well. And then you'll watch the lesson, which I'm doing now. And then you'll do the assignment, very similar to the other day, okay? I got your learning targets and success criteria over there if you want to take a look at those. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, first, as I mentioned, your journal entry. You should write in your journal for about 10 minutes. I'm expecting a minimum of 5 lines of writing. If you're under 5 lines of writing, you are not going to get full credit. So looking for at least 5 lines. Remember, you can write about anything that you want to write about. It can be an actual journal. You can write poetry. You can write fictional short stories. You can do music, anything you possibly want. If you need ideas for that, remember to click on the hyperlink in the journal, in your journal entries, and I have prompts, creative writing prompts there for you guys. So, Race in America continued. We're going to do a little recap and foreshadow. So we examined race, and as a class, based on your responses, talking to some of you guys, we agreed that race really shouldn't be taken into account when regarding things like job applications, college entry, things of that sort. And with federal institutional racism abolished, the American dream should realistically be alive now more than ever, which is great. Just moving forward for the day, as you guys have put it, the basis of equality is treating everyone equally. It sounds so simple, right? And so many of you guys ask, it's so simple, why can't we just do it? Well, I'm going to show you some of the kind of modern and subtle racism that's going on in the world today. That's actually the most common and most underlying racism that's happening. And the reason we can't see it is because it's very, very clever, and it's important that we teach ourselves to be able to see what's really going on. A recap on institutional racism. With institutional racism abolished federally, there are no laws in place preventing people from achieving their American dreams. This is an amazing thing to celebrate. We are literally living in the freest country in the history of mankind right now, virtually. The freest, largest country in the history of mankind. It is something to celebrate. Don't let people drag you down and tell you how awful it is to be an American and how awful America is, okay? On that note, a little recap, okay? So much of what you guys mentioned, we're not being hindered by laws. This is a great thing. But so much of what you all mentioned in being successful in the American dream were things like work ethic, attitude, skill, ability. These are how people should be measured in their strive for the American dream, rather than by their race. So we've come to an agreement on the measurements of an individual, at least in regards to the workforce, educational opportunity, and such like that, all right? But what happens when racism is taking place right before our eyes and we don't see it? Can we learn to identify why we don't see it? And can we change our perception to see the world as it should be rather than as it's sold to us by the media? Even now, as you imagine racism in your head, it is absolutely, most likely, not what we are going to be discussing in the coming minutes here. So to preface, equality and balance. Balance is everything. You will hear me say this on repeat this year, so take it in. Make it a mantra if it helps. I say it so many times, balance is everything. Know at the center of everything, there is balance. In nature, science, everything in between. Balance is constantly shaping the world around us. And today, we're going to look at balance when it comes to logic. It will help us solve some of the world's most intricate issues with an unbiased approach and understanding. This is something, what you guys learned today, if you pay attention, you can take with you for the rest of your life. It will change you as individuals in the best way possible. So let's take a look at the Harvard example that I brought up in part 1, right? I mentioned schools like Harvard still have some institutional racist policies in place, stating that they don't allow some students in based on their race, and they allow some others in solely or favorably based on their race. In many of your writing responses, there are outcries of shock, which is great, right? You're like, this is terrible. And that's, that should be your response. So many of you said, how can African Americans be denied access still to education in the 21st century? Well, let's think back to that Harvard example for a second. Did I ever mention what races were being not let in due to their race? No, I did not. But it was assumed that it was African Americans. Why? Because the media has a hold on you. It has a hold on all of us. Look at the last 6 months. It's ingrained into your brain. Why? It's an election year. So they press these issues so hard that aren't necessarily valid issues, but they press it in you until you think every African American person, every minority is a victim. We need to not assume other people as victims or profile a race into something when we have no reason to do so. In fact, it is Asian Americans who are protesting against schools like Harvard, but they aren't receiving any press. Why? Because it does not fit the narrative. It does not fit the media's narrative because they are not on a right side or a left side per se. They are on the side of equality, and they want the American dream like everyone else. They are striving for an education because they want a good job. So why are they protesting? Well, obviously they're the ones not being allowed in to schools due to their race. While it is in fact African Americans and other minority groups that are being admitted to schools with drastically lower schools because schools want to appear diverse. What happened to individuals being judged on ability, work ethic, thoughts, etc.? I put this picture up here with the check mark, right? And it shows how schools are operating on a fundamental level right now, trying to bring in so much diversity to appear like they are all inclusive. Okay, it's about baiting people in and getting their college tuition effectively. Now that isn't to say, and don't take this in this way, that is not to say that minorities getting into these schools that have high scores shouldn't be in those schools. It is saying that there are policies in place that are allowing minorities with lower scores to get into schools. And other minorities like Asian Americans are being rejected that have drastically higher scores, okay? So this isn't to say every minority that's at a prestigious university got in based on race. No, I'm not saying that whatsoever. But there are policies in place, and this is happening. Now here comes the structural lesson you need desperately to know and to apply to your life today, if you can, and going forward. When a group of people are treated differently, it not only affects them, but as balance always has its way, it affects everyone else involved. Let's look at some examples here, like the teacher's pet example. If a teacher were to grade a certain race easier than another race, it has not only made it easier for that student or students, but has simultaneously made grading more difficult for the rest of the students. We must not think about the primary person or group affected by racial bias in this case solely, but about all those affected. And I've got another example that can maybe help you understand this simultaneous balance. As one group is discriminated or favorited, the other always swings in the balance. Whether it's one individual and an entire class or a group of people and an entire class, everything shifts at the same time, okay? So here's a great sport example, okay? I'll call it the soccer example. You're on a soccer team and your coach decides to go harder on you than others. We've probably all felt that at some point in our lives, right? Why are they picking on me? Why do they make me go harder than everyone else? As they go harder on you, they are simultaneously going easier on others. We have to understand that these two things are always correlating. And you can look at it from the opposite perspective. The coach went easier on the entire team except for one player, meaning they went harder on that one player. They go harder on a player, that means they're simultaneously going easier on another player or a group of people, so on and so forth, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Those are 3 examples there for that. We have the Harvard example, we have the teacher's pet example, and the soccer example of simultaneous balance happening when there is prejudice taking place. Now we're going to move into sort of another topic here. And I like to call this the diversity dilemma. The diversity dilemma is very interesting. And what has become a politically correct climate, we are sometimes brainwashed, literally, into thinking in a racist way, even though we don't mean to, okay? So it's kind of like racial bias that some of you guys mentioned a little bit, except it's working in a way you don't really expect it to, and we're going to go over that. For instance, some of your writing responses stated, race should never be taken into account when applying for a job, so-and-so. But some of you went on to add later on in that same paragraph, sometimes just a sentence later, that some races should be given jobs because they are minorities. Do we see the problem there? Each sentence is a complete opposite claim. It's a paradox. They cannot exist at the same time together. You cannot have equality, true equality, and add a but at the end and say, however, right? That's a problem. And if you find yourself saying this when you need to take a step back and say, why am I saying this? Okay. It doesn't make sense. And in fact, you actually are coming off more racist than if you said, no one deserves to be higher than another person. If you specifically point out a minority group or minorities as a whole, and say that they deserve favorable treatment, that is in fact a racist sentiment. And we'll go into why right here, right? You're basically saying, could those minorities not get the job because of their abilities and work ethic? Are you or those in control so much better than them that they must be aided into earning a job by being profiled? So you see, we must be careful when telling people that they deserve things based on their race. We do not have that authority. No one has that authority. You deserve what you earn and what you work for. We and you and I, no one has the authority to tell someone else that they deserve a boost based on the color of their skin, regardless of skin color. You cannot say, for example, that someone favoring a white person because of their skin color is racist, but someone favoring a Hispanic person because of their skin color is not racist. They are equally racist, and that is something so important that we need to get through our heads in the 21st century if we're going to progress as a society and as a culture. Just remember, it's belittling, illogical, and is really the biggest form of modern and subtle racism, telling somebody that they deserve a boost because of their race. It's incredibly insulting. Showing someone true respect is treating them as you would treat anyone else. I want to nail this through you guys. Please understand this. Grind this into your mind. No one wants a trophy by default. No one wants to be given a job by default. No one wants to be told they earned something because of their race or partially because of their race. They want to know they got something because they earned it, because they worked hard for it, because their abilities and their work ethic told them they could earn it. To go off that, we're going to look at the NBA diversity example. Okay, this is a great example when people say, we need more diversity in blank field. We need more diversity here and here and here and here. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing. But here's a perfect example, all right? We need to be careful not to force diversity, as it usually comes off as posturing and not genuine, almost always, okay? Just like what I mentioned what colleges do. They bring in students, they kind of pull in, they're like, oh, let's have one of you, and one of you, and one of you. And that way, we can take pictures of all of you guys and show how inclusive and how woke we are, and we can post this on our social media accounts to get more people because it looks like we're doing the right thing, right? So let's look at an example. The NBA. 75% of the NBA is comprised of black players. Well, looking at it from the opposite perspective, right? If we wanted to force diversity into different job fields and professions, because it's the buzzy thing to do, because it sounds socially right, even though it's actually pretty racist, should we step in and require that the NBA fire black players and hire more white, Latino, Asian, etc. players? All of you guys are like, absolutely not. That doesn't make any sense. Obviously, the answer is no. Those players are the best players in the world, and each player in the NBA earned their place and deserves to keep it because of what? Everything you guys said in the first place. Their work ethic, their ability, who they are as individuals. You guys, I can tell just from your answers, your heart of hearts, they're in the right places, but you just need to understand the logic behind it. So you're not pulled into something and you become a part of something that you don't want to be a part of. You don't want to be a part of modern and subtle racism. You need to wake up. You need to see this at a younger age than having to wait to be 25, 30 years old, right? And I'm telling you all this because I really care about you guys. Anyways, hopefully this has brought us full circle and it's allowing us to view the world in a bit of a different, more logical way, a compassionate and empathetic way, an understanding way. The more we know, the more we use our logic, right? The more we can move on. Some of you guys said, when will racism be end? End it in your own life. Find where there's subtle racism or modern racist ideas that you've gone along with. You don't have to feel guilty about it. You just fix it. And you say, oh, I didn't realize this, but now I know this. So in the future, when I see it happening, I can maybe be different than the group of people that just shouts for whatever's being pushed to them by social media and by news channels. You can take a step back from those people and you can say, you can look at everything logically. Say, do I agree with this? Do I not agree with this? Why? Let's use the logic that we thought about, the balance, right? The diversity dilemma. Let's take these things into account so that we can treat people equally and move forward with our best judgment. So in conclusion, perhaps there is racism happening in companies and universities and schools. In fact, I can guarantee that it is. Most of it, right, is modern and subtle. It's maybe not in the way we envisioned it. It's not in the way you envisioned it 20 minutes ago. Perhaps your entire perception of what racism in the 21st century looks like. But racism is becoming more clever, more subtle, and it's up to us to catch it when we can in order to make the world a better place for all people. I hope you guys got something from this. Put a lot of time and effort into this. Hopefully it's enlightened you. And if you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys possibly have. So I'm totally here for you guys. And this is something I really just wanted to nail home, this idea of balance and looking at the world and situations in a logical way for the rest of the year. It'll save us so much time later on. And because we have it, we're going to have much more interesting discussions as a class. Wow, that was a big lecture. So everyone take a deep breath. If you need to go rewatch it, it's up there. And you can go back to it, of course. What you're going to do now, though, you're going to go to Google Classroom. You're going to select the Race in America assignment, part 2. It's going to be very similar to part 1. You're going to answer the 3 questions using claim, evidence, and reasoning. And I'll go over the questions real quick, as I always do. What is one thing you found interesting in lesson 8? What interested you about it? Explain. And I want to make sure real quick, you guys, always use claim, evidence, and reasoning. But also when I put numbered questions, be sure to answer all parts of the question. If there's 2 sentences here, right? Like number 2, explain the diversity dilemma. That's you explaining it from the lecture. That's part 1 of the question. And part 2 of the question is, what are your thoughts on the dilemma? I want to make sure you guys are answering both of those, okay, using claim, evidence, and reasoning. And you can put it all into one paragraph, into one big thought, using claim, evidence, and reasoning, but make sure you're answering both parts. Third and lastly, how does balance come into play when favoring a specific race of people? Who does it affect? Why is it important to see all sides of when favoritism or discrimination takes place? 3 questions on that one, okay? So it's probably gonna be a little bit longer paragraph, but it's also kind of feeding you the answers with questions, right? How does balance come into play when favoring a specific race of people? Who does it affect? Why is it important to see all sides of when favoritism or discrimination takes place? All these answers obviously found in the lecture. So if you go to do this assignment before you watch the lecture and I read your answers, I'm going to be like, oh, they did not do the lecture. They did not watch the lecture. So there it is. I hope you guys have an amazing weekend. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. If you guys have any questions at all, hit me up. As always, you can message me. We can talk by video. You can talk in the group chat. We can have a one-on-one conference, anything you guys want. Email, everything, okay? Have an amazing day, and can't wait to see you guys next weekend.